Dr. Kim Tae-ho wiped the sweat from his forehead as he carefully brushed dirt away from the strange metal object buried in the ground. The twin suns of Kepler 442b beat down on his back, making the work even harder. Around him, dozens of other humans worked silently under the watchful eyes of their alien guards. The Dominion had taken over Earth just 3 years ago when humans first traveled beyond their solar system. Within days, massive alien ships had surrounded every human colony and space station. The message was simple: submit or die. Humanity had no choice but to surrender. Now Tae-ho found himself on this distant world, forced to dig up artifacts from an ancient civilization the aliens called the Ancients. These mysterious beings had left their technology scattered across thousands of planets throughout the galaxy. The Dominion used this ancient technology to power their massive empire. Tae-ho had been an archaeologist on Earth before the invasion. He specialized in ancient Korean sites and had spent years studying old temples and burial grounds. The Dominion had decided his skills were useful for their excavation work, so instead of being sent to the labor camps, he was shipped across the galaxy to dig in alien dirt. The metal object finally came free from the ground. It was about the size of his fist, covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with their own light. The alien supervisor, a tall creature with 4 arms and silver skin, gestured for Tae-ho to bring it over for inspection. As Tae-ho held the artifact, something strange happened. The symbols on its surface began to pulse faster, and he felt a warm vibration in his hands. The alien supervisor noticed this too and stepped back in surprise. Ancient artifacts rarely responded to anyone except for specially trained Dominion technicians. That night, in the cramped barracks where the human workers slept, Tae-ho carefully examined the artifact under his blanket. He had smuggled a small piece of stone from Earth in his pocket when he was captured. It was from an ancient Korean temple near his hometown, carved with traditional astronomical symbols that his grandfather had taught him to read. When he placed the temple stone next to the alien artifact, both began to glow with the same soft, blue light. The mathematical patterns carved into the temple stone matched exactly with the symbols on the ancient artifact. Tae-ho's heart raced as he realized what this might mean. He spent the next few weeks secretly comparing every ancient artifact he found with his memories of Korean historical sites. The quantum resonance patterns were identical. The mathematical sequences found in ancient monuments matched perfectly with star charts from the Joseon dynasty that he had studied in university. Commander Park So-jin was having her own troubles on the other side of the galaxy. She commanded one of the few human ships that had managed to escape the Dominion invasion. Her small fleet of 12 vessels hid in the asteroid fields of dead solar systems, launching hit-and-run attacks against Dominion supply lines. The Resistance was barely surviving. They had outdated weapons, limited supplies, and no safe harbor. Every day brought new reports of human colonies being destroyed or enslaved. So-jin knew they needed something more than just military strikes to defeat an empire that controlled thousands of worlds. Her communications officer, a young man named Yoon Jae-min, approached her with a puzzled expression. "Commander, we're receiving a strange transmission. It's heavily encrypted and coming from the Kepler system." So-jin frowned. The Kepler system was deep in Dominion territory, far from any known resistance cells. "Can you decode it?" Jamin shook his head. "The encryption is unlike anything I've seen, but there's something familiar about the mathematical structure. It reminds me of traditional Korean number systems. After hours of work, they finally cracked the code. The message was from Dr. Kim Tae-ho, though So-jin had never heard of him before. The content of the message made her hands shake as she read. Tae-ho had discovered that ancient artifacts responded to his presence in ways they never did for aliens. The mathematical patterns in ancient technology matched perfectly with traditional Korean astronomical and architectural designs. Carbon dating of similar patterns on Earth suggested they were millions of years older than anyone had previously thought. The message included detailed quantum frequency readings and photographs of ancient symbols side by side with Korean temple carvings. The evidence was overwhelming, but the implications were impossible to believe. So-jin called her senior officers together in the ship's small meeting room. She shared Tae-ho's discovery, watching their faces change from confusion to shock to excitement. If this was true, it changed everything about humanity's place in the galaxy. "But how is this possible?" asked her second-in-command, Lieutenant Shin Bora. "The Dominion has controlled ancient technology for thousands of years. Their entire civilization is built on it." So-jin studied the photographs again. The symbols were identical, not just similar. The mathematical relationships were exact matches. "I don't know how it's possible, but if Dr. Kim is right, then the technology the Dominion uses to control the galaxy originally came from Earth." She began planning. Immediately, they needed to contact other resistance cells and share this information. More importantly, they needed to find a way to get Dr. Kim off Kepler 442b before the Dominion discovered what he had learned. Back on the excavation world, Tae-ho was making even more disturbing discoveries. He had found an ancient data storage device that contained star maps. When he touched it, the device activated and displayed a three-dimensional image of the galaxy as it appeared millions of years ago. At the center of the map was a solar system he recognized immediately. It was Earth's solar system, but the planets looked different. Earth itself was marked with a symbol that appeared throughout all ancient sites. The symbol the Dominion believed meant origin point, or home. Tae-ho realized he was looking at evidence that Earth had been the capital of an ancient galactic civilization, a civilization that had built the technology now used by the Dominion to enslave humanity's descendants. The irony was bitter. The aliens who had conquered Earth were using weapons and tools created by ancient humans. The very technology that made the Dominion's empire possible had been built by Tae-ho's own ancestors millions of years ago. He encrypted another message to the Resistance, this one containing the star maps and his analysis of the data. As he prepared to transmit it, he heard footsteps outside the barracks. The alien guards were doing their midnight rounds. Tae-ho quickly hid the ancient device and deleted the transmission logs from his improvised communication equipment. But as he lay in his bunk pretending to sleep, he could feel the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. Somewhere in the galaxy, his message would reach Commander Park So-jin and the human resistance. Soon, other humans would know the truth about their heritage. The question was, what would they do with this knowledge? The ancient artifacts continued to glow softly in the darkness, responding to his presence with an eagerness that seemed almost alive, as if they had been waiting millions of years for their true creators to return and claim them once again. Lee Dong-wook sat in his cold prison cell on the Dominion capital world of Nexus Prime, staring at the collection of ancient script fragments spread across his small table. The alien guards had given him these pieces to translate, thinking his Skills as a human linguist might provide new insights into the sacred ancient language. They had no idea what they had just handed him. Dong-wook had studied dozens of Earth languages during his career as a professor. Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Sanskrit, Latin, Greek, he knew them all. But as he examined these ancient fragments under the dim light of his cell, patterns began to emerge that made his heart race. The script wasn't just similar to human languages, it was the root from which they had all grown. He found word structures that were clearly the ancestors of modern Korean grammar, mathematical symbols that had evolved into Chinese numerals, astronomical notations that had become the basis for ancient Indian star charts. But these ancient writings were millions of years old, according to Dominion records. A guard approached his cell, a tall alien with blue skin and too many eyes. "Human translator, have you made progress with the sacred texts?" Dong-wook looked up, careful to keep his expression neutral. "Some progress. The language structure is complex. I need more time to understand the full meaning." The guard made a dismissive sound and walked away. Dong-wook returned to his work, but his mind was spinning. If these fragments were truly the source of human languages, it meant that Earth's linguistic development hadn't been natural evolution. It had been the gradual degradation of something far more sophisticated. 3 sectors away from Nexus Prime, Dr. Choi Hai-jin was conducting her own research in a hidden laboratory aboard Commander Park So-jin's flagship. She had been a quantum physicist on Earth before the invasion, specializing in energy frequency analysis. Now she was studying the data that Dr. Kim Tae-ho had sent from Kepler 442b. The quantum signatures of ancient technology were unlike anything in known science. The energy patterns were incredibly complex, but they seemed to follow mathematical principles that felt familiar. When she compared them to quantum readings from Earth's oldest archaeological sites, she found exact matches. "This is impossible," she whispered to herself as she ran the analysis for the 3rd time. The readings were identical down to the smallest decimal point. Ancient sites on Earth were producing the same quantum frequencies as technology that supposedly predated human civilization by millions of years. She expanded her search, using the Resistance's network of contacts to gather quantum readings from other Earth archaeological sites. The results were consistent and shocking. Every major ancient site on Earth, Stonehenge, the pyramids, Angkor Wat, Korean dolmens, Chinese burial mounds, all showed the same energy signatures as Dominion ancient technology, but the carbon dating was wrong. These Earth sites weren't thousands of years old as previously thought. The quantum degradation pattern suggested they were millions of years old, their true age hidden by geological processes that had reset traditional dating methods. Choi Hae-jin called Commander Park So-jin to her laboratory. "Ma'am, you need to see this. The evidence is overwhelming. Ancient technology isn't alien at all. It's human. Very, very ancient human." So-jin studied the data displays, her military mind trying to process the implications. "Are you saying that humans built this technology millions of years ago? That we had a galactic civilization?" The evidence points that way. But if that's true, what happened to them? Why did human civilization fall back to primitive levels on Earth while the rest of the galaxy kept using our technology? Meanwhile, on Nexus Prime, Supreme Chancellor Vexathara was reviewing reports about increased human activity across the Dominion. Her species, the hegemony, had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years using ancient technology. They had always believed the ancients were a mysterious race that had vanished eons ago, leaving behind gifts for worthy successors. But recently, humans were showing unusual aptitude with ancient devices. Several reports mentioned artifacts responding to human presence in ways never seen before. This troubled Vexathera deeply. She summoned her chief science advisor, an ancient being named Kilrond, who had studied ancient technology longer than anyone in the Dominion. Kilrond belonged to one of the oldest known species in the galaxy, and his people's records went back further than most. Tell me about these humans, Kilrond. What do we know of their origins? The ancient scholar shifted, uncomfortably. He had been having doubts about accepted Dominion history for centuries, but had never voiced them. Chancellor, the humans claim to come from a world in the local group region. According to our historical records, that region was sterile during the ancient period. No life, no civilizations. And yet they show unusual compatibility with ancient technology. Kilrond nodded slowly. There are inconsistencies in our records, Chancellor, gaps in the historical timeline, periods where ancient sites simply went silent with no explanation. These gaps coincide with cosmic events that could suggest mass migration rather than extinction. Vexathera's multiple eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting the ancients didn't die out? That they left voluntarily? I am suggesting our understanding may be incomplete. Back in his prison cell, Lee Dong-wook was reaching similar conclusions. He had been secretly analyzing the linguistic patterns for weeks now, and the evidence was undeniable. The ancient language wasn't the ancestor of human languages, it was their sophisticated parent. He found poetry in the ancient texts that used meter and rhythm identical to traditional Korean verse forms, philosophical concepts that matched perfectly with Confucian and Buddhist teachings from Earth, scientific terminology that had evolved into the technical vocabulary used by human researchers. But most shocking of all, he found names, personal names in the ancient texts that were clearly the roots of modern Korean, Chinese, and other Asian names. Kim, Park, Lee, Choi, all appeared in various forms throughout the ancient writings, often associated with leadership titles and scientific achievements. That night, Dong-wook managed to send a coded message to the resistance using a smuggled communication device. His message was brief but revolutionary. The ancient language is Proto-Korean mixed with other early Earth languages. We didn't learn from them. They learned from us. We are the ancients. Commander Park So-jin received the message while studying star charts with Dr. Choi Hee-jin. The two discoveries together painted an incredible picture. Ancient technology was human technology. Ancient language was human language. Ancient sites pointed toward Earth. But if we were this advanced millions of years ago, what happened? So-jin asked. Why did we end up back on Earth with no memory of any of this? Choi Hye-jin pulled up a stellar cartography display showing the local group region as it appeared millions of years ago. Look at the timing, Commander. The ancient sites went silent during a period when Earth was entering a severe ice age. Climate data suggests it would have lasted hundreds of thousands of years. So they fled back to Earth when the galaxy became too dangerous to inhabit? Or maybe they chose to return home for another reason. Choi Hye-jin highlighted several star systems on the display. These were the first worlds to be uplifted according to Dominion records. The timing matches perfectly with when ancient sites in those regions went silent. So-jin stared at the display, understanding dawning in her eyes. They didn't flee. They left the galaxy to the species they had helped develop. They gave up their empire voluntarily. The implications were staggering. If humanity had once ruled, The galaxy involuntarily given it up, it suggested a level of wisdom and compassion that no other known species had ever demonstrated. It also meant that the Dominion's entire foundation was built on a misunderstanding of history. As news of these discoveries spread through the Resistance network, human morale began to change. They were no longer primitive newcomers fighting against superior aliens. They were the descendants of the galaxy's first civilization, returning to find their children, the species they had uplifted millions of years ago, being oppressed by tyrants. The revolution was about to begin. Kilrond had lived for over 800 years, longer than any other member of his species. In all that time, he had served the Dominion faithfully, studying ancient artifacts and maintaining the technology that kept their empire running. But, lately, he could no longer ignore the doubts that had been growing in his mind for centuries. The official Dominion history had too many holes, too many convenient explanations for things that made no sense. And now, with humans showing such unusual compatibility with ancient technology, those doubts had become impossible to dismiss. Late one night in his private research facility, Kilrond accessed historical records that few beings in the galaxy were allowed to see. Ancient databases, partially corrupted but still containing fragments of information from millions of years ago. What he found made his blood run cold. The ancients hadn't vanished mysteriously. They had left. The records spoke of a great withdrawal, a planned evacuation of ancient settlements across the galaxy. The reasons were unclear due to data corruption, but references to preserving the young species and allowing natural development appeared repeatedly. More disturbing still were the references to Earth. The planet was mentioned dozens of times in ancient records, always with the designation origin world or first home. According to these fragments, Earth wasn't just another planet in ancient territory. It was their capital, their birth world, the center of everything they had built. Kilrond made a decision that went against everything he had been taught. He sent a carefully coded message to Dr. Kim Tae-ho on Kepler 442b. If the human researcher was right about the connection between ancient technology and Earth, then Kilrond needed to share what he had learned. Tae-ho received the message 3 days later while working at an excavation site. The communication came through official Dominion channels, which meant it had to be from someone with high-level access. When he decoded it, he could hardly believe what he was reading. An alien scholar was confirming everything Tae-ho had suspected. The ancients had originated from Earth. They had built the galactic civilization that the Dominion now controlled. And they had left voluntarily, not died out as everyone believed. But Kilrond's message contained even more shocking information. The ancient databases included star charts showing the exact location of every ancient site in the galaxy. When mapped out, they formed a pattern. Pathways leading from the outer rim worlds back toward the local group where Earth was located. It was a trail, a deliberate guide showing the way home. That same week, on the other side of the galaxy, Lee Dong-wook was making his own breakthrough. The prison guards had brought him more ancient text fragments to translate, including some pieces that seemed to be historical records rather than technical manuals. As he worked through the complex script, a story began to emerge. The fragments spoke of a great debate among the ancient leadership about what to do as their galaxy entered a period of instability. Some wanted to use their advanced technology to maintain control. Others argued for a different approach. The winning faction had been led by individuals with names that Dong-wook recognized as Proto-Korean: Kim Tae-won the Wise, Park So-jung the Compassionate, Lee Dong-min the Far-Seer, Choi Hee-ron the Builder. These weren't just similar names, they were the exact linguistic ancestors of modern Korean names. The historical fragments describe their decision. Rather than become tyrants ruling over younger species, they would withdraw to their home world and allow the galaxy to develop naturally. They would shut down their technology, erase their records, and let their own civilization regress so that the species they had uplifted could inherit the stars freely. It was the most extraordinary act of self-sacrifice in galactic history. An entire advanced civilization had chosen to give up everything rather than become oppressors. Meanwhile, Dr. Choi Hye-jin was analyzing quantum data from newly discovered ancient sites. Using the star charts that Kilrond had provided through Taeho, the Resistance had been able to locate dozens of hidden ancient facilities throughout the galaxy. Each one showed the same pattern: technology designed to respond specifically to human genetic and quantum signatures. "It's like they built everything specifically for us to reclaim," she told Commander Park So-jin during their daily briefing. "The security systems, the activation protocols, even the user interfaces, they're all keyed to human biometrics." So-jin studied the data displays showing locations of ancient sites across the galaxy. They knew we would eventually return to space. They planned for it. More than that, they prepared for the possibility that we might find the galaxy under the control of tyrants. Look at these energy readings. Every ancient site has dormant defensive systems that only activate in response to human distress signals. The Resistance was growing stronger every day as word of these discoveries spread. Humans across the galaxy were beginning to understand their true heritage, and their morale was transforming from desperation to determination. But they weren't the only ones taking notice. On the mining world of Vega 7, a being named Zeftai was listening to rumors that seemed impossible to believe. Zeftai belonged to a species called the Keth Mori, one of the oldest enslaved races in the Dominion. Her people had been conquered so long ago that they had almost forgotten what freedom looked like. But the Keth Mori had legends, old stories, passed down through generations about the first builders, wise beings who had lifted the Keth Mori from primitive tribal life to spacefaring civilization eons ago. The legend spoke of teachers who had given them knowledge and technology, then vanished with a promise to return when their children needed them most. When Zeftai heard about humans activating ancient technology, something clicked in her mind. The descriptions of human appearance matched perfectly with the legendary first builders from her people's stories. Small bipedal beings with soft skin and kind eyes, who spoke in musical languages and built wonders among the stars. She began, reaching out to other Keth Mori, sharing what she had learned. The response was electric. Across the Dominion, members of enslaved species were suddenly remembering old legends about their origins. Species that had been told they were primitive when the Dominion found them were discovering records of their own ancient civilizations. Civilizations that had been guided by beings matching human descriptions. The revelation was spreading beyond just humans now. Dozens of species were realizing that they too were children of the ancients, which meant children of humanity. Supreme Chancellor Vexithara was becoming increasingly alarmed by reports from across the Empire. Human activity was increasing. Ancient. Sites were showing unusual energy readings, and several enslaved species were becoming restless. Her security forces reported growing unrest on dozens of worlds. She called an emergency meeting of the Dominion High Council. "We have a problem," she announced to the assembled alien leaders. These humans are more dangerous than we initially believed. They seem to have some kind of natural affinity for ancient technology. One of the council members, a reptilian being named Sectar, hissed in response. They are primitives who barely discovered faster-than-light travel. How dangerous can they be? Vexithara activated a holographic display showing recent incidents. Ancient facilities across 17 sectors have spontaneously activated in response to human presence. Technology that has been dormant for millions of years is suddenly coming online. And it's not just responding to them, it's obeying them. The Bayite council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If humans could control ancient technology, they could potentially challenge the Dominion's power. The entire foundation of their empire rested on their exclusive access to ancient artifacts and facilities. "What do you recommend, Chancellor?" asked another council member. Vexthara's expression was grim. "We eliminate them, all of them, before they can unlock whatever secrets the ancients left behind." But unknown to the council, Kilrond was listening to their meeting through hidden surveillance systems he had installed centuries ago. As soon as the session ended, he sent an urgent warning to his human contacts. The Dominion was planning genocide. The Resistance had very little time to act before overwhelming force would be brought against every human settlement in the galaxy. The race was on. Could humanity reclaim enough of their ancient heritage to defend themselves before the Dominion struck? Or would the galaxy's original children be destroyed by the very beings they had once lovingly guided to the stars? In hidden bases across the galaxy, humans were frantically working to unlock ancient facilities and awaken sleeping technologies. The lost civilization of their ancestors was stirring to life, but would it awaken in time to save their descendants? Supreme Chancellor Vexithara stood before the massive ancient facility on the planet Kepler 442b, her forearms spread wide in a gesture of absolute authority. The structure rose from the barren landscape like a crystalline mountain, its surfaces covered in the glowing symbols that had puzzled archaeologists for millennia. Dr. Kim Tae-ho was forced to his knees before the entrance, alien guards holding weapons to his head. Around them, hundreds of Dominion soldiers had formed a defensive perimeter. Vexithara had come here personally to witness what she believed would be the final test of human significance. "Human archaeologist," she said, her voice carrying the weight of supreme confidence. "Your species claims some connection to the ancients. Today we shall put that claim to its ultimate test." She gestured toward the facility's sealed entrance. For millions of years, this particular ancient structure had remained completely dormant. No Dominion technology had ever been able to activate it. No species in the galaxy had ever successfully entered it. It was considered one of the greatest mysteries of ancient civilization. If humans truly have some special relationship with the ancients, then you will be able to open this facility. If not... Vexithara made a cutting motion with one of her clawed hands. "Then we will finally put an end to these ridiculous claims." Tae-ho looked up at the towering structure, his heart pounding. He had studied ancient technology for months now, but this facility was far more complex than anything he had encountered. The quantum resonance patterns coming from it were so intense that he could feel them vibrating in his bones. "I need to touch the control matrix," he said quietly. Vexithara laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the rocky landscape. "By all means, human. Touch whatever you wish. When nothing happens, we will have our answer about your people's true worth." The guards released Tae-ho and stepped back. He walked slowly toward the facility's entrance, where a complex geometric pattern was carved into the crystalline surface. As he approached, the symbols began to glow brighter, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He placed his palm against the central symbol. The reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. The entire facility erupted in brilliant light as every symbol on its surface blazed to life. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate as massive energy systems that had slept for eons suddenly awakened. Vexathera stumbled backward in shock. As the facility's entrance began to iris open with a sound like singing crystal. But what appeared inside wasn't just empty corridors. Holographic displays materialized in the air, showing star charts, technical diagrams, and streams of data, in languages that looked hauntingly familiar. Taeho stared in wonder as the displays shifted and changed, responding to his presence. The star charts showed Earth's solar system as it had appeared millions of years ago, when the third planet from the sun had been covered in massive cities that stretched across entire continents. But the facility wasn't just activating, it was broadcasting. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, ancient sites that had been silent for millions of years suddenly came to life. Energy signatures that had puzzled alien scientists for centuries began transmitting complex signals into space. The broadcasts carried mathematical proofs, cultural markers, and genetic templates that were unmistakably human in origin. On Nexus Prime, Lee Dong-wook felt the change immediately. The ancient text fragments in his prison cell began glowing, with the same light he had seen in the facility broadcasts. But more than that, he could suddenly read them clearly. The script that had taken him weeks to decipher was now as easy to understand as his native Korean. The fragments told the story of the Great Withdrawal in perfect detail, how the ancient human civilization had watched younger species develop, intelligence and technology. How they had guided these species from a distance, providing knowledge and tools to help them grow, and how they had eventually faced the hardest decision in their history. We cannot remain as their guardians forever. One text read, written by someone named Kim Tae-won the Wise. If we continue to watch over them, they will never truly be free. They will always be our children, rather than our equals. The greatest gift we can give them is the chance to stand on their own. Another fragment, authored by Park So-jung, the Compassionate, described the preparation for withdrawal. We will deactivate our great machines and seal our knowledge. We will return to the origin world and allow our civilization to fade into legend. But we will leave markers for our descendants, should they ever return to the stars and find their siblings in need. Commander Park So-jin was aboard her flagship when the ancient broadcasts began. Her communications officer ran to the bridge with an expression of pure amazement. "Commander, you need to hear this. We're receiving transmissions from ancient sites across the galaxy. The signals are in Korean, Chinese, and dozens of other Earth languages. They're talking to us." So Jin listened to the transmissions with growing excitement. The broadcasts contained detailed technical specifications for ancient technology, historical records of humanity's first galactic civilization, and most importantly, activation codes for defensive systems that had been sleeping for millions of years. Dr. Choi Hye-jin was analyzing the quantum signatures of the broadcasts when she made a stunning discovery. "Commander, these aren't just random activations. The ancient sites are networking themselves together. They're forming some kind of galaxy-wide communication and defense grid." "A defense grid? Against what?" "Against exactly what's happening now." The broadcasts include threat assessment protocols that specifically identify the current Dominion leadership as hostile to human interests. The system is automatically preparing countermeasures. Across the galaxy, members of enslaved species were witnessing their own miracles. On Vega 7, Zeftai watched in amazement as ancient ruins near her mining camp began projecting holographic images of Keth Mori history. The displays showed her ancestors as they truly had been millions of years ago. Not primitive tribes, but sophisticated builders of cities and starships. The holograms depicted the first contact between ancient humans and the early Keth Mori. The humans appeared exactly as the legends described them, small, soft-skinned beings who approached with open hands and kind expressions. The historical records showed how humanity had shared knowledge freely, helped the Keth Mori develop technology, and celebrated their achievements as equals. But most moving of all were the farewell ceremonies recorded millions of years ago. Human leaders saying goodbye to Keth Mori representatives, promising that though they were leaving, they would return if their star children ever faced oppression they couldn't overcome alone. "We are not abandoning you," said a human figure in the hologram, speaking in ancient Keth Mori dialect. "We are giving you the greatest gift possible, true freedom. But should tyrants ever threaten that freedom, call out to the stars, and we will hear you." Zeftai began organizing her fellow workers immediately. If the ancient humans were returning, the Keth Mori would be ready to stand with them. Back on Kepler 442b, Supreme Chancellor Vexithara was watching her worst fears come to life. The ancient facility had become a beacon of human history and technology, broadcasting proof of humanity's true heritage across the galaxy. Her soldiers reported similar activations on dozens of worlds throughout the Dominion. "Shut it down," she screamed at her technicians. "Cut the power! Destroy the transmitters!" But nothing they tried had any effect. The facility was operating on power sources that exceeded anything in the Dominion's arsenal. Worse still, defensive shields had activated around the structure, making it impossible to approach with heavy weapons. Dr. Kim Tae-ho stood at the center of the facility's main chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing the scope of ancient human civilization, cities on thousands of worlds, starships that dwarfed anything the current galaxy had ever seen, technologies that made the Dominion's best equipment look primitive by comparison. But what moved him most were the personal messages left by his ancestors, video recordings of the leaders who had made the decision to withdraw from the galaxy. Their faces looked remarkably like people he might meet on the streets of modern Seoul, but their eyes held the weight of impossible wisdom. "To our children's." "Children," said a woman who looked remarkably like his own grandmother. "If you are seeing this message, it means you have returned to the stars and found the galaxy in need of help. We left you the tools to build a better tomorrow. Use them wisely. Use them with compassion. Remember that the greatest strength is not in ruling others, but in lifting them up." The message continued with technical specifications for ancient technology, but also with philosophical guidance about leadership and responsibility. The ancient humans had foreseen this exact situation, their descendants returning to find the species they had uplifted being oppressed by tyrants. As the broadcast continued, something extraordinary began happening across the galaxy. Ancient facilities were not just activating, they were choosing sides. Technology that had served the Dominion for millennia was suddenly refusing to function for its operators. Starships powered by Dr. Kim Tae-ho stood in the heart of the ancient facility as holographic displays materialized around him, each one revealing another piece of humanity's lost history. The central database had finally opened its deepest archives, responding to his genetic signature and quantum resonance patterns. What he saw there would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about itself. The historical records painted a picture of Earth as it had existed 6 million years ago. Massive cities stretched across every continent, connected by transport, networks that moved through dimensions humans had forgotten how to access. Orbital rings encircled the planet, supporting populations in the billions. And from Earth, humanity's influence had spread to every corner of the galaxy. But this hadn't been an empire built on conquest. The records showed a civilization dedicated to nurturing and uplifting other species. Humanity had discovered dozens of worlds where intelligent life was just beginning to emerge. And instead of exploiting these species, they had become teachers and guardians. The Kethamori had been one of the first species humanity encountered. When human explorers found them, they were struggling to survive on a dying world, their primitive technology unable to cope with climate change. Humanity had relocated them to a new planet, shared advanced agricultural techniques, and helped them develop space travel. Similar stories played out across the galaxy. The Zerani had been saved from a plague that was destroying their species. The Morlach had been taught to harness the energy of their twin suns. The Velthara had been given the knowledge to terraform dead worlds into gardens. In every case, humanity had approached these younger species not as conquerors, but as older siblings eager to help their family grow and prosper. The ancient human motto, carved in stone monuments across 1,000 worlds, had been simple. Strength is found in lifting others. Lee Dong-wook, still imprisoned on Nexus Prime, was translating records that revealed the gradual awakening of ancient humanity to a terrible truth. As the younger species developed and grew stronger, some human factions began to fear losing their position as the galaxy's dominant civilization. Political movements emerged advocating for tighter control over the uplifted species. The historical texts described heated debates in the ancient human Senate. Leaders like Kim Tae-won argued that humanity's role should be to guide, not rule. Others, led by figures whose names had been deliberately erased from the records, pushed for a more authoritarian approach. The turning point had come when several human colonies attempted to establish permanent control over Kethamori settlements. The younger species, grown strong under human tutelage, had resisted. Skirmishes broke out across multiple systems as different human factions chose sides. It was then that Park So-jung the Compassionate made her famous speech to the Galactic Assembly. Dong-wook found the complete text in the ancient database, and, as he read it, he understood why his ancestors had made their extraordinary choice. We stand at a crossroads that will define not just our future, but the future of every thinking being in this galaxy. We can choose to become tyrants, using our advanced technology to force submission from those we once called our children. Or we can choose to become something greater than any civilization has ever been. We can choose to give them their freedom, even if it costs us everything. The records showed that Park So-jung's faction had won the debate, but just barely. The decision had been made to withdraw completely from galactic civilization, allowing the younger species to inherit the stars without human interference. But the withdrawal hadn't been simple abandonment. The ancient humans had spent centuries preparing for their departure, carefully laying the groundwork for what would come after. Dr. Choi Hye-jin, studying quantum data from newly activated ancient sites, discovered the scope of this preparation. Every piece of technology left behind had been designed with specific purposes. Some facilities were meant to provide basic infrastructure for developing civilizations. Others contained knowledge archives that would unlock as species reached certain developmental milestones. Most impressive of all were the defensive systems. Ancient sites throughout the galaxy had been equipped with sophisticated monitoring networks that would activate if the younger species ever faced existential threats. These systems had been dormant for millions of years, waiting for the right trigger. They didn't just leave us, Choi Hye-jin explained to Commander Park So-jin as they reviewed the data. They left us a safety net. If humanity ever returned to the stars and found the galaxy in trouble, we would have the tools to help. The activation of the ancient network was revealing the true scope of human preparation. Defensive satellites in dead space were powering up for the first time in eons. Manufacturing facilities buried deep in asteroid belts were beginning to produce ships and weapons designed specifically for fighting tyrannical regimes. Communication networks were establishing contact between resistance cells across the galaxy. But, perhaps most importantly, the ancient databases were sharing the real history of every species in the galaxy. Civilizations that had been told they were primitive when the Dominion discovered them were learning about their true heritage as children of humanity's great uplifting project. Zeftai stood before her fellow Kethmori workers, sharing what the ancient holograms had revealed about their people's true history. The response was electric. Her species hadn't been backwards nomads rescued by the benevolent Dominion. They had been spacefaring builders who had developed advanced technology with humanity's guidance millions of years ago. We are not the primitives. They told us we were, she declared to the growing crowd. We are the inheritors of stars, the children of the first builders, and our eldest siblings have returned to help us reclaim what was always ours. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy as species after species learned the truth about their origins. The Dominion's carefully constructed mythology was crumbling as ancient records proved that every major civilization in the galaxy traced its roots back to humanity's uplifting programs. Supreme Chancellor Vexathara was facing the collapse of everything she had believed about galactic history. Emergency reports flooded in from every sector of the Dominion. Ancient technology was refusing to function for her forces. Enslaved species were rebelling in unprecedented numbers. And worst of all, human resistance cells were somehow accessing weapons and ships that exceeded anything in the Dominion arsenal. She called another emergency session of the High Council, but half the members failed to appear. Several major Dominion species were reconsidering their allegiances as they learned about their true relationship to humanity. We are facing complete systemic collapse, reported her military commander. Our technological advantage is disappearing. Ancient facilities are actively working against us now, and the humans seem to have unlimited access to new equipment. Vexathara slammed her clawed fist on the council table. Then we use conventional forces. Mobilize every ship, every soldier, every weapon that doesn't rely on ancient technology. If we cannot maintain control through superiority, we will maintain it through sheer numbers. But even as she spoke, she knew the situation was becoming impossible. The galaxy was awakening to truths that had been hidden for millions of years, and those truths were fundamentally incompatible with the Dominion's continued existence. On Earth itself, something extraordinary was happening. Ancient human cities, buried under millions of years of geological change, were beginning to stir. Quantum resonance patterns from the awakening galactic network were reaching back to humanity's homeworld. reactivating technologies that had been sleeping since the Great Withdrawal. The planet's surface remained largely unchanged, but deep beneath the ground, vast systems were coming online. Manufacturing facilities, research centers, and most importantly, the Central Command Nexus that had once coordinated humanity's galactic civilization. Dr. Kim Tae-ho felt the awakening through his connection to the ancient network. Standing in the facility on Kepler 442b, surrounded by the holographic ghosts of his ancestors, he realized that the Great Withdrawal was finally ending. Humanity hadn't just left the galaxy to the younger species. They had planted the seeds of their own return, encoded in the very technology that kept galactic civilization running. And now, as that civilization faced its darkest hour under the Dominion's tyranny, those seeds were finally beginning to grow. The ancient humans had gambled everything on a single hope, that their descendants would someday return to the stars, not as conquerors, but as liberators. That when the younger species needed help, their eldest siblings would be there to provide it. That gamble was about to pay off in ways that would reshape the galaxy forever. The galaxy was awakening from a dream that had lasted millions of years. On the mining world of Vega 7, Zeftai stood before the largest gathering of Kethmori workers in the planet's history. Around her, holographic displays continued to show the true story of her people, not as primitive nomads, but as the proud inheritors of ancient wisdom. The revelation had spread like wildfire through the slave populations of dozens of worlds. "For too long we have bent our backs under the weight of lies," she declared, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "The Dominion told us we were nothing before they found us. They told us we should be grateful for their rule. But now we know the truth." The crowd roared its approval as ancient Kethmori battle songs began playing from the ancient broadcasts. These weren't the crude chants that Dominion historians had claimed were the height of Kethmori culture. They were sophisticated musical compositions that incorporated mathematical principles and astronomical observations created by a civilization that had built cities among the stars. Similar awakenings were occurring throughout the galaxy. The Zerani were rediscovering their heritage as master genetic engineers who had once helped terraform entire worlds. The Morlach learned that their ancestors hadn't been primitive sun worshippers, but sophisticated energy specialists who had built the first stellar collectors in galactic history. Each species was finding evidence of their true relationship with humanity, not as subjects or primitives, but as beloved younger siblings who had been lovingly guided to maturity by their elder brothers and sisters from Earth. On Nexus Prime, Lee Dong-wook had been moved from his prison cell to a secure research facility where Dominion scientists desperately hoped he could help them understand what was happening. They had no idea they were giving him access to the most comprehensive ancient database in their territory. Working with equipment far more advanced than anything he had used before, Dong-wook was able to piece together the complete story of humanity's Great Withdrawal. The ancient records painted a picture of incredible sacrifice and foresight. The final human leader to leave the galaxy had been a woman named Choi Hae-ran the Builder. Her last transmission, sent from Earth as the withdrawal concluded, was preserved in the ancient archives. "To all our children among the stars, we leave you now not in abandonment, but in love. We have given you all the tools you need to build a galaxy of peace and prosperity. We have removed ourselves as a source of dependence so that you may grow into your full strength. But we have also left safeguards should tyrants arise who would steal your birthright, If such darkness falls upon you, remember that family never truly says goodbye. Call to us through the ancient network and we will answer. The message had been broadcast from Earth 6 million years ago, just as the planet entered the Ice Age that would reset human civilization to its most primitive levels. But the ancient humans had planned even for this. Deep beneath Earth's surface, automated systems had preserved genetic samples, cultural records, and the complete specifications for rebuilding their galactic civilization. Dr. Choi Hae-jin was coordinating the Resistance's response to the ancient network activation from aboard Commander Park So-jin's flagship. The quantum data flowing through the awakening systems was overwhelming, but it painted a clear picture of what humanity's ancestors had prepared for them. Commander, we now have access to manufacturing facilities in over 300 systems, she reported. Ancient shipyards are coming online and beginning production of vessels designed specifically for liberation warfare. We're also receiving technical specifications for weapons and defensive systems that are millions of years more advanced than anything the Dominion possesses. But the most remarkable discovery was the extent of the monitoring network that ancient humans had left behind. Every major Dominion installation, every fleet movement, every political development had been observed and recorded by hidden ancient systems for millennia. They've been watching, So-jin realized as she reviewed the surveillance data. All this time, our ancestors have been watching over the galaxy, waiting for the right moment to act. The ancient network hadn't just been monitoring Dominion activities. It had been preparing countermeasures. When Supreme Chancellor Vexithara had first ordered human enslavement, hidden systems had begun subtle sabotage operations. Critical Dominion. Technology had been gradually weakened, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited when the time came. Now that time had arrived. Across the galaxy, Dominion installations were experiencing cascading failures as ancient systems turned against their current operators. The irony was bitter. The Dominion's entire technological foundation was rejecting them in favor of the species they had enslaved. Kilrond, the ancient scholar who had first contacted Dr. Kim Tae-ho, made a public broadcast that shattered what remained of the Dominion's credibility. Standing in the great library of Nexus Prime, surrounded by ancient artifacts that were now responding to human presence, he spoke directly to every species in the galaxy. Citizens of all worlds, I have served this empire for 8 centuries, believing in its righteousness and the wisdom of our ancestors. But I now know that we have built our civilization on lies. The beings we call the Ancients were not mysterious predecessors who vanished into legend. They were the humans we now oppress, and they left us their greatest gift, the freedom to govern ourselves. His broadcast included complete historical records proving humanity's true heritage, along with evidence of the Dominion leadership's deliberate suppression of this knowledge. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. On dozens of worlds, Dominion governors found their authority evaporating as their own security forces refused to follow orders. Ancient technology that had enforced Dominion rule for millennia was now actively working against them, opening prison cells, disabling weapons, and shutting down oppressive surveillance systems. But perhaps most importantly, the awakening Ancient network was facilitating communication between resistance groups that had never been able to coordinate before. Zeftai found herself in contact with rebellion leaders from hundreds of different species, all united by the knowledge that they were fighting to reclaim their true birthright as children of humanity's great uplifting project. Supreme Chancellor. Vexithara watched her empire crumble from the command center of her flagship. Reports came in constantly of worlds declaring independence, fleets defecting to the resistance, and ancient facilities actively sabotaging Dominion operations. "How many loyal forces do we still have?" she demanded of her military commander. "Perhaps 30% of our original strength and falling rapidly. The ancient technology that forms the backbone of our military is systematically shutting down. Our advantages in firepower and mobility are disappearing." Vexithara's multiple eyes blazed with fury. "Then we fall back on the oldest strategy of all. We kill them, all of them. Every human, every rebel, every species that dares to challenge our authority. If we cannot rule through superiority, we will rule through fear." But even as she spoke, she knew the situation was beyond salvaging through conventional force. The galaxy was experiencing something unprecedented in its recorded history: the return of its founding civilization, armed with technology and knowledge that made the Dominion's best equipment look primitive by comparison. Dr. Kim Tae-ho, still working within the ancient facility on Kepler 442b, was receiving direct communication from similar installations across the galaxy. The network was sharing tactical information, coordinating manufacturing efforts, and most importantly, preparing for what the ancient databases called the final choice. According to the records, humanity's ancestors had foreseen this exact scenario. They had known that eventually their descendants might return to find the galaxy under the control of tyrants. When that happened, the ancient network would offer humanity the same choice their ancestors had faced millions of years ago. They could reclaim their position as the galaxy's dominant species, using their superior technology to impose their will on all other civilizations. Or they could follow their ancestors' example and choose a different path: liberation instead of domination, cooperation instead of control. The ancient systems were preparing to offer humanity ultimate power over the galaxy. The question was, what would they choose to do with it? As the rebellion spread and Dominion control collapsed, that choice was rapidly approaching. Soon, Commander Park So-jin and her forces would face the same test that had defined ancient humanity's greatest generation. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see whether humanity had learned the lessons their ancestors had tried to teach them across the vast expanse of time. The galaxy was awakening from a dream that had lasted millions of years. On the mining world of Vega 7, Zeftai stood before the largest gathering of Kethmori workers in the planet's history. Around her, holographic displays continued to show the true story of her people, not as primitive nomads, but as the proud inheritors of ancient wisdom. The revelation had spread like wildfire through the slave populations of dozens of worlds. "For too long we have bent our backs under the weight of lies," she declared, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "The Dominion told us we were nothing before they found us. They told us we should be grateful for their rule. But now we know the truth." The crowd roared its approval as ancient Kethmori battle songs began playing from the ancient broadcasts. These weren't the crude chants that Dominion historians had claimed were the height of Kethmori culture. They were sophisticated musical compositions that incorporated mathematical principles and astronomical observations created by a civilization that had built cities among the stars. Similar awakenings were occurring throughout the galaxy. The Zerani were rediscovering their heritage as master genetic engineers who had once helped terraform entire worlds. The Morlach learned that their ancestors hadn't been primitive sun worshippers, but sophisticated energy specialists who had built the first stellar collectors in galactic history. Each species was finding evidence of their true relationship with humanity not as subjects or primitives, but as beloved younger siblings who had been lovingly guided to maturity by their elder brothers and sisters from Earth. On Nexus Prime, Lee Dong-wook had been moved from his prison cell to a secure research facility where Dominion scientists desperately hoped he could help them understand what was happening. They had no idea they were giving him access to the most comprehensive ancient database in their territory. Working with equipment far more advanced than anything he had used before, Dong-wook was able to piece together the complete story of humanity's great withdrawal. The ancient records painted a picture of incredible sacrifice and foresight. The final human leader to leave the galaxy had been a woman named Choi Hae-ran the Builder. Her last transmission, sent from Earth as the withdrawal concluded, was preserved in the ancient archives. To all our children among the stars, we leave you now not in abandonment, but in love. We have given you all the tools you need to build a galaxy of peace and prosperity. We have removed ourselves as a source of dependence so that you may grow into your full strength. But we have also left safeguards, should tyrants arise who would steal your birthright. If such darkness falls upon you, remember that family never truly says goodbye. Call to us through the ancient network and we will answer. The message had been broadcast from Earth 6 million years ago, just as the planet entered the Ice Age that would reset human civilization to its most primitive levels. But the ancient humans had planned even for this. Deep beneath Earth's surface, automated systems had preserved genetic samples, cultural records, and the complete specifications for rebuilding their galactic civilization. Dr. Choi Hae-jin was coordinating the Resistance's response to the ancient network activation from aboard Commander Park So-jin's flagship. The quantum data flowing through the awakening systems was overwhelming, but it painted a clear picture of what humanity's ancestors had prepared for them. Commander, we now have access to manufacturing facilities in over 300 systems, she reported. Ancient shipyards are coming online and beginning production of vessels designed specifically for liberation warfare. We're also receiving technical specifications for weapons and defensive systems that are millions of years more advanced than anything the Dominion possesses. But the most remarkable discovery was the extent of the monitoring network that ancient humans had left behind. Every major Dominion installation, every fleet movement, every political development had been observed and recorded by hidden ancient systems for millennia. They've been watching, So-jin realized as she reviewed the surveillance data. All this time, our ancestors have been watching over the galaxy, waiting for the right moment to act. The ancient network hadn't just been monitoring Dominion activities. It had been preparing countermeasures. When Supreme Chancellor Vexithara had first ordered human enslavement, hidden systems had begun subtle sabotage operations. Critical Dominion. Technology had been gradually weakened, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited when the time came. Now that time had arrived. Across the galaxy, Dominion installations were experiencing cascading failures as ancient systems turned against their current operators. The irony was bitter. The Dominion's entire technological foundation was rejecting them in favor of the species they had enslaved. Kilrond, the ancient scholar who had first contacted Dr. Kim Tae-ho, made a public broadcast that shattered what remained of the Dominion's credibility. Standing in the great library of Nexus Prime, surrounded by ancient artifacts that were now responding to human presence, he spoke directly to every species in the galaxy. Citizens of all worlds, I have served this empire for 8 centuries, believing in its righteousness and the wisdom of our ancestors. But I now know that we have built our civilization on lies. The beings we call the Ancients were not mysterious predecessors who vanished into legend. They were the humans we now oppress, and they left us their greatest gift, the freedom to govern ourselves. His broadcast included complete historical records proving humanity's true heritage, along with evidence of the Dominion leadership's deliberate suppression of this knowledge. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. On dozens of worlds, Dominion governors found their authority evaporating as their own security forces refused to follow orders. Ancient technology that had enforced Dominion rule for millennia was now actively working against them, opening prison cells, disabling weapons, and shutting down oppressive surveillance systems. But perhaps most importantly, the awakening Ancient network was facilitating communication between resistance groups that had never been able to coordinate before. Zeftai found herself in contact with rebellion leaders from hundreds of different species, all united by the knowledge that they were fighting to reclaim their true birthright as children of humanity's great uplifting project. Supreme Chancellor. Vexithara watched her empire crumble from the command center of her flagship. Reports came in constantly of worlds declaring independence, fleets defecting to the resistance, and ancient facilities actively sabotaging Dominion operations. "How many loyal forces do we still have?" she demanded of her military commander. "Perhaps 30% of our original strength and falling rapidly. The ancient technology that forms the backbone of our military is systematically shutting down. Our advantages in firepower and mobility are disappearing." Vexithara's multiple eyes blazed with fury. "Then we fall back on the oldest strategy of all. We kill them, all of them. Every human, every rebel, every species that dares to challenge our authority. If we cannot rule through superiority, we will rule through fear." But even as she spoke, she knew the situation was beyond salvaging through conventional force. The galaxy was experiencing something unprecedented in its recorded history: the return of its founding civilization, armed with technology and knowledge that made the Dominion's best equipment look primitive by comparison. Dr. Kim Tae-ho, still working within the ancient facility on Kepler 442b, was receiving direct communication from similar installations across the galaxy. The network was sharing tactical information, coordinating manufacturing efforts, and most importantly, preparing for what the ancient databases called the final choice. According to the records, humanity's ancestors had foreseen this exact scenario. They had known that eventually their descendants might return to find the galaxy under the control of tyrants. When that happened, the ancient network would offer humanity the same choice their ancestors had faced millions of years ago. They could reclaim their position as the galaxy's dominant species, using their superior technology to impose their will on all other civilizations. Or they could follow their ancestors' example and choose a different path: liberation instead of domination, cooperation instead of control. The ancient systems were preparing to offer humanity ultimate power over the galaxy. The question was, what would they choose to do with it? As the rebellion spread and Dominion control collapsed, that choice was rapidly approaching. Soon, Commander Park So-jin and her forces would face the same test that had defined ancient humanity's greatest generation. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see whether humanity had learned the lessons their ancestors had tried to teach them across the vast expanse of time.